Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello, and welcome to, or welcome back to, the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey of this show that has been designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. For more information, go visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this podcast, usually along with Craig Brown, who is an industry leader and former PLM leader at General Motors. But today, it's just me, because today we're interviewing a friend of mine who is a specialist in helping individuals realize their influence and how much influence they have, not just what they believe they have. However, she has managed a company for well over a decade, and many of her people work remotely. And we wanted to talk today about what it is to work in a remote environment, because that's what's happened to all of us as of recently, and what it is to manage people who are working remotely. So I thought Stacey Hanke would be the best person I know to bring onto the podcast just to have a chat about this. Because every week I try to bring, along with Craig, to this podcast really interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all of the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today, I hope, is going to be one of those days. So Stacey, she is the author of a book called Influence Redefined, and she is the president and CEO of Stacey Hanke, Inc., and they do training for people across industry lines. Stacey, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for just trusting me with your client and their employees and their leaders. It's an honor to be able to help from afar in any way I can today.
Well, Stacey, it's really interesting because I don't read the bios that I get from people's PR people. So can you tell us a little bit about Stacey Hanke, Inc. and what your background is?
Yeah, my background was in radio. Thom, I wanted to be the next Katie Couric, but apparently that did not work out.
Well, you're here on this podcast now, so you're just like Katie Couric. Yeah. Katie Couric has never been on this podcast, so you're actually ahead of her.
Well, see, you just made my day. And then from there, a lot of corporate stops, always in training and development. 18 years ago, we started Stacey Hanke, Inc. And our focus off of what you shared in the intro is bringing people's awareness around how much influence they really have rather than what they believe to be true. And it applies heavily to what we're doing now because we talk a lot about how can you have influence through your communication, both verbally and non-verbally, whether you're in person, you're over the phone, you're on a webcam, and now this virtual environment that we're trying to all navigate through.
So I find that really interesting that part of that definition is that you help people realize how much influence they have versus what they believe to be true. Do most people not realize how influential they are in their careers?
It's that, and they don't realize sometimes the distractions that they're creating, whether it's through their body language, through their messaging. That's really how we define it, that those two, they have to be consistent. They have to be consistent all the time. Now that we're pushed into this virtual environment, we're hearing a lot of clients say, we always thought we needed help in our meetings in person. Now that we're in a virtual environment, it's just magnified how much work we need.
So it's really interesting because our audience is made up of a lot of people who are engineers, they're technologists, they work, many of them in the manufacturing area around things like automotive and aerospace, et cetera. And I know you have worked with clients across industry lines. What are some of the things you've seen in working with people in engineering and tech and manufacturing that ties to the work that you do?
You got it. You brought up Boeing earlier. That's actually one of our clients. So we've worked with a lot of their engineers. What we find across the board is as an engineer or someone that's more on the technical side, perhaps they're not always thinking about that. Their delivery is just as important as their knowledge level. We were working with a group here in Chicago, which is where I reside. It was one of my first clients, Thom. It was Wrigley Gum. We were working with a group of engineers. We were videotaping because that's the only way I think you can figure out how much influence you have, how effective you are. We watched his video recording. We're maybe 10 seconds into the playback, and he says, I can't even understand what I'm saying. And I told him, if you can't understand it, no one else around you can understand it. And it's not a rip on anyone's career. I think that comment is safe to say about anyone. Well, when was the last time when you're in a conversation and as an engineer, you really have to communicate the wealth of knowledge that you have in a way that someone that's not as experienced as you can understand it? What are you thinking more about in that moment? Is it more about the acronyms, the high terminology, or are you really thinking about, gosh, I wonder how they're experiencing me right now, which is a big determination of the level of influence you have.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of people listening can relate to exactly what you just said. So we have gotten into this world where now we're suddenly communicating differently, right? In the last 6 or 8 weeks, everything has changed. And people who have worked on collaborative teams very often in the same office space are now working from home. We're doing Zoom calls or other video type calls. There's all these new areas of this. And what I wanted to talk about today was really about how do we go from working in that team environment to working from home, to working remotely. And I want to talk about this from 2 sides. Number one, I want to talk about it from the side of the manager, because you've run this team and you've got maybe a team that works in design and engineering, and all of a sudden they're not in the office and you have to talk to them differently. But I also want to talk about from the standpoint of many of our listeners are people who are growing their careers. If you're a person who is, I don't know, you're just newer to the workforce and all of a sudden you've been sequestered, shelter in place, work from home. How do you communicate? How do you handle that work from home environment? So I want to talk from the manager side and also the employee side. So let's start off a little bit with your background. I know that when you started the company, I'm making an assumption here, but just for the audience, Stacey and I have been friends for a decade, and I have watched her in the last 10 years grow from a small business to a pretty mighty business in our field of speaking and training. And when you started the business, my assumption is Stacey Hanke Inc. was just Stacey Hanke. So I work for myself. I'm a solopreneur. It's different for me. I am the manager and the employee, but I'm always with me. So I imagine when you started, it was just you, but now you've grown the company and you've always worked remotely with many of your people. Mm-hmm. So let's talk from the manager side about how do you do that? How do you work with a team, maybe a growing team, remotely?
Yeah. And some of the responses to your questions will apply. This is good news so that it's not overload here and you're not sure what to take. It'll apply to both if you're a manager and you're working from home. But the number one thing that I always have found is important, because my team, we don't work in an office. We all work remotely, is communicate, and then communicate again. However,
should people communicate?
We should communicate. However, though, Tom, it is so much easier to lose people's attention virtually, even when the webcam is on. You have to be that much more succinct and to the point. So that's just bare bones right there. Number 2, we have been turning our webcams on for years, for as long as Zoom, I don't know what the history is here, for as long as Zoom's been out, we have always turned on our webcams. You need to keep your people visually connected. You need to keep their head in the game, keep them motivated. They need to be seeing you. I've had numerous client conversations, one yesterday that said that their younger staff is really struggling with being apart. They do Friday happy hours. They do other events throughout, game night, but it's all via Zoom. Now, we used to only do one Zoom call a month, and a lot of that was because the team was so busy and they were out on planes. Now we do every Friday, and we start off every call, Tom, on the positive. I mean, let's face it. Do you really need to keep talking about the crisis on every call? I don't know. It's that constant feed of negativity. And I don't lie to them. I mean, I'll tell the team how it is, but I also start off every call on round robin, what are you grateful for? But it has to be different from last week. And that opens up even more conversation, Tom.
That is so interesting, because I was working with a client early in this, and they had never done Zoom calls, and they were moving to that. And and they were doing daily ones. And the first week, he said the first 20 minutes was people talking about the problems and their fears and the negativity. And so he asked me, what can we do? And we came up with an idea that, like kindergarten show and tell, that every day someone would be assigned and you would know when it was coming. So you'd have a couple days warning. And the first 4 minutes of every call would be that person show and telling what is their favorite thing in their home. And some people ended up bringing their spouse or their kids, some people their pet, other people had a family heirloom or something that they had created or whatever.
Smart.
But he said it was every single time people now needed to sort of play the game of, how do they either outdo or how do they do a callback to someone else's thing?
That's right.
And it only took 4 or 5 minutes instead of 20 minutes of lamenting, and it was always positive. Nobody has a favorite thing that's negative. So they found that was a great way to start meetings. So I love to hear you say that, because that was my advice.
Love that idea. We did one where a lot of my team members have little ones at home. So that's raising another issue. They're all homeschooling. And they were so concerned about trying to have this meeting with us and kids running around. So one Zoom call, I'm like, let's just call it what it is. Bring your kid on. Everyone bring your kid into the video. Then after that, I throw a lot of it on them. I don't want them to just hear me give a weekly update of, we got all these proposals out there. Nothing landed this week. This client canceled. Instead, I say to them, you all have to come with something. What do you want to talk about? And it's an open book. That way, too, as the leader, stop taking control of every meeting. Put the responsibility on someone else on your team. So then now you rotate that facilitator role. What I found out long ago, Tom, what that does is suddenly everyone is that much more interactive because they know what it's like to facilitate a call and no one says anything.
Yeah, because it's hard. I do a lot of call facilitation. And when you say, does anybody have any questions? And it's like crickets.
No one
that's
does
hard.
Anything. So everyone's responsible to bring it too. The other thing that I did when we started going quarantine is I used to only do an individual call once a month, again, Zoom. Now I check in with them every week. I want to make sure they're okay. And what can I do? What can I do to help? And sometimes they help me. So that's another piece. The other piece, something that we've been doing for a long time, and we've kind of upped the game on what we share. Every Friday, I send out what's called a Friday thought. And it'll be anything, Tom. Before all this, it would be a training tip or a conversation I had with the client, something that we can use, some motivational piece. Now it's a lot of resources on anything around what we're going through, updates on clients. So that comes out every Friday morning. That did several years ago. Suddenly the team is constantly sharing their stuff throughout the week. I do one more thing in the quarantine. Every Monday, I send them a morning text. And we have a group that has a very strong faith. So usually it will be something, a Bible verse. It might be a prayer to kick off the week. It might be something funny that we saw over the weekend. And just my one text will blow up a conversation that the team has all day. I may not partake in all of it because I also want them to just not feel like they have to be careful with me on it. I just let them go. All of those steps, they've always been a close team, Tom, but just over the last 6 weeks that we've been in lockdown, they've become closer and they're doing their own things. They're practicing Zoom on their own now. They do trial runs with each other so they can prep with the client. And I had with that.
You brought up, when you said practicing with Zoom, that's interesting. My wife runs an association and they've had to cancel all of their local meetings. And so they're trying to do happy hours and educational things all with Zoom. And she is getting together with the other chapter managers from different cities within the association that she works for. They have, they're based in Chicago, but then every city has sort of a manager who runs that city. And they get together and they practice how to use the video, how to use Zoom. They talk to each other about virtual backgrounds versus whatever's in their house. So I find that interesting that you said that, because I've watched my wife have to jump in. And she was one who wouldn't normally want to turn on the camera. And you had brought that up earlier, that your team has been turning on the camera since you started using these tools. But I'm finding with a lot of people, some people aren't comfortable turning on the camera. So if you have a team and you have team members that video makes them nervous, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think like anything, it's brand new. So we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's usually what requires development. I would require it. I would really require it. I throw out the benefit of why it's important that they turn that video on, but it's uncomfortable because it's not what they know to be true. And now, in the time of everything that's going on, now's the time to develop. Now's the time to get these folks developed and to develop yourself too. You bring up the Zoom. That is one thing we've been talking for years about. When people say, how do I know that they're connected? How do I know they're not multitasking? And I'll say to them, you don't know. But all you have to do is use the technology that we have and turn on your webcam, see what's going on. I want to make this feel like, whether it's with you or any of our clients, I always say to them, I know I can't be with you right now. I just want you to feel like I'm sitting in a room next to you. because they're going through stuff too, and you can't see what they're going through.
So you share some really good advice from the standpoint of being a manager. Let's peel back the onion. Come on. I know a lot of business owners. It's not all wine and roses. What's some of the hard parts of being a manager in a remote setting?
Yeah, I mean, as a leader, you need to be calm. So when this all first hit, I mean, I think I'm like everyone. There was the freak out mode. There was the negative talk, and oh my, how am I going to do this? And I remember thinking I had to be on that Zoom call with that team the next day and tell them our calendar just got cleared for 3 months. How am I going to tell them that? And what I did more than I've done ever before, I literally prepared a message, like in detail, prepared a message. And all I want to do, Tom, is I just need to get my thoughts out, both positive and negative. It helped to get the negative thoughts out so I didn't come across that way. Now, I don't communicate to my team that, we just got our whole calendar got cleared off, but it's going to be okay. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you don't want to be all gloom, and because how I behave is going to be a reflection of how they respond. So by me really laying out that message of, okay, I have to tell them everything that got canceled, but now I have to tell them, here's the solution. Here's what we're going to do. And as a team, we're going to be strong and we're going to do this together. One of our logo, I don't even know what you would call it, but anytime anyone goes in front of a client, we're all emailing each other saying, I've got your back. I've got your back. We've been saying that for years. So now more than ever, my conversation with them is no matter what happens, I've got your back. And I just want you to know what I'm doing to help you get there. But it is, I mean, I think you just have to be calm. And I'm going to give you an example. So now that we're all living with whoever you're living with, and I'm with my husband who is working, and he does a lot of Zooms.
And you and your husband, you live urban. You live inside Chicago, and you actually live in a small small condo in like 900 square feet, and you're both working from that small area.
There's days, if it's nice out, I'm taking most of my calls on the balcony because we've got to take turns, and because when we're both on Zoom, it doesn't work. Well, his VP of communication is, oh my gosh, the communication first is awful. And it's the constant, we're in a crisis. You may be pay cut. We don't know how many of you are going to stay. I mean, every Zoom call, Tom, freaks me out. And I know we have to say it, but part of me, and take this for what it's worth. I do not need to tell my team there's a crisis. They know that. I'm not going to bring it up anymore. Our conversation is all about an update, and that's some of the bad stuff, who's canceling. But the majority of our calls is, what can we do today? What are we going to do now? Because if they lose sight, they're going to lose that fight. And I think as a leader, it's your job. You chose to be a leader. You've got to keep them focused on where you're going and where they can go as well.
So let's take this now to the other side. So let's put on the employee hat. Someone is suddenly working from home, and they have all the pressures. They're homeschooling their kids. They're living in whatever square footage they have with their whole family. They're concerned about aging parents. They're concerned about income. Maybe their spouse has been furloughed, and so now money is tight. What do you do if you are that employee? What do you do to thrive in a remote environment, at least the best you can?
And I know people aren't going to hear me say this because I get it. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's really tough right now. And everyone has so many different layers of issues. I think empathy is a huge piece. Or as a employee, anytime that you're talking, even to your family or to your clients and to your teams, your peers, just acknowledge the elephant in the room. Sometimes it's acknowledging the elephant in the room. I've avoided the question, how are you doing? I don't know, kind of crappy right now. But rather, what are you doing to take care of yourself? I've been using that one a lot. What's been the toughest part, or how have you dealt with some of the quarantine issues? I'd love to learn from you. So empathy is number one. And I know this works. And I'm going to circle back around, Tom. I was talking to one of our clients. He's a VP of sales. And he said, we're shocked. Q1, highest sales ever. Now, keep in mind, March is Q1, and that's when everything fell off the cliff. And I asked him, well, what do you think applied there? They went back and they listened to some of the recordings of the sales professionals' conversations with their clients, and they're spending more time getting to know them. They're using empathy to connect and engage. I've heard that from 2 VP of sales at 2 different clients. So it works. The other thing that I was just talking to someone on my team yesterday that's really struggling. And I said to her, what makes this tough is think about anyone that works in the corporate world. You get up, maybe you feed your kids, You go to the gym, you grab your coffee, you listen to the same radio station on the way to work, you take the same route, you get to work and you get to see all your buddies and you say hello. That's gone. So even that disruption in our life is going to throw you off. So for the best of your ability, and I'm not a parent, so my heart goes out to you guys who are trying to manage that too. Can you create some type of more of a routine in your morning hours before you have to sit now at your desk? A lot of our team members, I told you, they're all homeschooling. So what we've worked out with them is what portions of the day do your kids have to be online? And we won't schedule any calls. I don't expect anything out of you during that time. Let's work around your schedule to be as flexible as you possibly can. I would guess you're in the same boat, Thom. I think the routine has really been big for my husband and I. And even at night, we have this rigorous routine. Even if we don't feel like doing it, usually one of us will feel like doing it and pull the other one on board.
And that's one thing that we've done. I have an adult daughter who actually lives around the corner from you. She lives in Chicago with her fiance. And then I have a high school senior. And I just sort of say this every time I say that. I feel sorry for the high school seniors more than just about anybody out there, except, of course, for people who are sick. But for the rest of us, I feel for those high school seniors, because while my older daughter, her wedding was supposed to be May 16th, and now it's hopefully going to be October, she still gets a wedding. It just is rescheduled, a new venue, everything's different, but she still will have that. The high school seniors, pretty much that experience that we all had, love it or hate it, we all had that experience, has pretty much been wiped clean. And so I feel very hard for them. So one of the things that we've done routine-wise is we have dinner every single night. So either my wife, my daughter, or I, one of the three of us will cook, but we sit down at the table, we eat dinner. We have literally only, I know we're supposed to support our local restaurants, but we've only had takeout twice in 6 weeks because we have really tried to make our routine that we cook,
smart,
we sit down, we do that, and then maybe we'll watch TV. She has different interests at 18 years old than her mom and dad does, so sometimes she'll watch a movie with us.
Really?
I know, that's shocking. I know. Sometimes she'll go to her room and watch Netflix on her own, but we have that routine that we have dinner every night. And I think that's been the saving grace for us all being working from home.
It's that. And then the one other thing, and I want to be careful how I say this because it's easier said than done, is you've got to really get a routine in your day, because there's so many distractions. And I'm not talking just physical distractions, your cats, your dogs, whatever else is going on, your children. I'm dealing with a spouse that he's got to make his important calls too, but you're dealing with the upstairs. You're dealing with your mindset. And I was telling Thom before we started to record this, I'm a little bit of a motivational guru. I mean, I drank the Kool-Aid when I was a teenager. I listened to all those motivational tapes, but I swear by them. And I haven't done that in a while. So in the last 6 weeks, every day I do something. I listen to someone that just feeds it and feeds it. I listen to a lot of, I told Jeff, my husband, I told Jeff the other day, I've never learned so much in a 6-week time frame in a very long time. Take advantage of the time now to develop you, because you're not going to get this time again.
Yeah. And everybody who's listening is obviously a podcast listener because they're listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Good for them.
I have started a routine of I listen to sort of educational and motivational podcasts and webinars and things like that every day. And actually, I hadn't thought of this, but I have learned more in the last 6 weeks than I probably have in 6 years.
That.
That hadn't crossed my mind. So that's awesome. And it's not like I'm spending the whole day listening to podcasts. I just chunk it out in the morning before I get going. But every day I listen to something uplifting. So if you're listening to this, you're already.
I want to put on what you just said. You don't listen to it all day. You do a chunk. So literally, if it helps you, and you have nothing to lose, so give it a try. Just chunk out what's the first hour at the desk. What's the second hour? Or are you better in 30-minute chunks? Are you better in 15-minute chunks? I mean, we literally, 12 o'clock is lunch every day, most days, unless there's a webinar or something, and then it'll get moved back. But even if it's just 30 minutes of us being together, as if we're never together, but 30 minutes to just break away from it. I'm such a big believer. I've been telling every one of our clients, Thom, that, God, this is a gift. This is a gift that you should be developing yourself. You should be developing your people, because you'll go back to the office. I mean, we can't be quarantined forever. Just think it's all about now, how you use this time. Do you want to be New Year's Eve night? Do you want to be celebrating New Year's Eve night and saying, wow, I would have never grown. I would have never have accomplished those things. I would never be here personally, physically, mentally, professionally, if I didn't take action during that time? Or do you want to be the one that says, I can't wait for that ball to drop? I lost all of 2020. 2021's my year. It doesn't work that way.
Wow, I that's powerful. As I guess our mindset and how we latch on to this will have a huge impact on how we look back on 2020. I love that. So as we let people go here, what advice do you have as someone who teaches people about influence? Heck, you wrote the book, Influence Redefined. When we start getting back to work, and you're right, this will end in some format. We will open up. I'm not a big believer in the term the new normal. I think that there will be changes, but I think we'll get back pretty much to humanity the way we remember it. So as people look at their careers, what advice do you have for them?
All right. If you really want to take it up a next step, you really want to grow your influence, take advantage now of getting some feedback. And I'm not saying, good, nice job, that was great. Before some of the events that I'm doing virtually with our clients, I'll ask Jeff beforehand, here's what I'm working on. Can you just kind of listen to it in the background? And I know I'm opening a can of worms, but I also know he's going to tell me the truth. Something I've been doing for years. 2 of my sisters are part of the company. Tom, you know that. And they come on a lot of my calls as a silent observer. Always prepare for feedback. I tell them exactly what I want them to look for. I just want to know. You don't know what you don't know. The other thing, take advantage of the fact that you're at your desk now and record as many of your conversations as you can, just to get a feel for how do I lead through my body language, through my conversations. As a manager, as an employee, what can I do to just give more to the conversation? If you could practice all that now, imagine how much more effective you will be when face-to-face. To me, face-to-face is a lot easier than virtual. So get the skills down now so you can be ahead of your competition when you go back.
I think that's awesome. I'm so glad that I invited you on to this podcast to talk about this. I think that everybody's gotten that little dose of motivation that you were talking about for today. So
good.
Stacey Hanke, if somebody needs to know more about you, they want to find your book, or maybe when things get back to normal, their company needs a little bit of training on influence, how do people find you?
Yeah, it's Stacey with an EY, HANKEINC.com. And Tom, we don't sell on social media, but we push a lot of research, especially now. We're pushing more out there. So if it helps, connect from afar and share what we've got. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you guys get through this.
Well, Stacey Hanke, thank you for being a guest here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And everybody who listened, please keep joining us. Join us every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.